Erickson here. For the last few weeks I've been using the iPhone 14 Pro, and unlike a lot of folks, I didn't post my initial thoughts in a video. I figured there was probably enough commentary with the surface level opinions, and if I just tossed out mine, it wouldn't really carry the weight that I'd want it to. So I really wanted to wait until I'd been using the phone long enough to give an informed opinion on it. Fast forward to now, and I've been using the iPhone 14 Pro quite heavily, mostly for everyday stuff like any other person would, texting, social media, and I've used the camera quite a bit. And most recently I went through 2.5 days without power due to Hurricane Fiona, which also gave me a bit of an interesting perspective on this phone where I've probably been using it more and for different things than I normally would. So with that said, let's just start with the design of the phone and work our way to what's inside. And I'll just give my thoughts surrounding the usage and performance and all the different aspects of the phone. Just like with most things Apple, especially iPhones, the design and construction on this phone is beautiful. You've got the glossy camera bump and stainless steel sides with the matte back. I know everyone who is probably familiar with this channel knows that I usually like to buy lighter colors in all my electronics, but I had to go with the new deep purple. What I love about this color is it stands out enough to give it some pop, but it's not like an over-the-top electric purple or anything that you're gonna get sick of quickly. One of my main concerns after buying this phone was what it would look like in a case, but I've tried it with 3 or 4 different cases, and it does seem to pair nicely with a lot of different styles and colors. And I haven't grown tired of it or wished that I'd got something else. I still think this is the best color out of this year's lineup. It's a fairly heavy phone for its size, which is not uncommon in these Pro models, weighing in at 206 grams, which is one of the main reasons why I stuck with the Pro and didn't get the Pro Max, which adds an extra 34 grams. I rest my phone on the bottom of my hand and on my pinky finger when I'm holding it. And that's one area I do prefer the regular iPhone with the aluminum housing. It's just a little bit lighter and nicer in the hand than the Pro, but the Pro is definitely much nicer outside of that. One last thing about the deep purple, it's probably going to be true for most colors. Maybe white or silver to a lesser extent, it is going to show dust relatively easy around the camera bump and the sides, along with any fingerprints, but it's pretty hard to get away from that on phones that use these materials. I don't think that the design on the shell took any drastic steps forward. It really looks that different outside of this purple color, but the biggest change design-wise, I'm sure everyone knows, is the display and the dynamic island. So before we go down the dynamic island rabbit hole, I do have to say that the display on this is just amazing. I've got the ProMotion 120Hz display that can go down to 1 Hz, which enables the always-on display. But for me, the biggest thing is the brightness. Going out in the sun, the screen gets super bright to the point where you don't have any trouble seeing it in direct sunlight, where at times there's no visual distinction from using this indoors to outdoors, which is really rare in a display. There was a phone I reviewed about a month ago from Oppo. That phone gets pretty bright itself and has a pretty nice OLED display, but the iPhone 14 Pro blows it out of the water. The colors are great whether you're watching videos, looking through pictures, whatever it is. I have zero complaints about the display as far as the picture and the brightness go. The display does house the dynamic island, which I've got kind of mixed feelings about. It's really neat that Apple actually used the camera cutout to their advantage in a sense. The dynamic island is kind of like a little active control center where if you're on calls, your call info is held in there. A lot of people have mentioned the timer, or if you're recording your screen, you get a little control in there. Playing music, all that good stuff. What I'm not a huge fan of is I do wish that the actions on the touchable area were reversed. And what I mean by that is right now what happens when you click the dynamic island is it takes you into a specific app that's taking control of the island area.
Look at me, sure. I'm the captain now.
And if you long press it, it just opens a notification style area where you can perform quick actions. The more I use it, the more it just doesn't really make sense to me. Oftentimes, if I want to do something quick, I'd like to be able to just press the island to perform a quick action, like pause a track if someone is talking to me without it taking me into the physical app. Outside of that, I don't find it particularly useful, at least not yet. And my one gripe with the dynamic island is it actually comes down further than the notch did. And it feels like it obstructs more of the view if you're watching content. Honestly, I think Apple has much bigger plans for the dynamic island, and we'll start to see that realized a little more when live activities are released. Those basically give you the ability to see live updates like scores or food deliveries, that kind of thing. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. Beyond that, the always on display took a little while to get used to. When Apple uses the term always on display, it really does feel like your phone is always on, depending on what wallpaper you've selected. I know I kept going to turn off my display on my phone and then thinking, oh yeah, it is off. Well, off being inactive. I do wish that was a little more like an Android phone where there's a pretty clear distinction between an active and inactive state. During our little hurricane experience here, I turned the always on display off to conserve more battery, and I actually haven't turned it back on. It's great to have it there for sure, but I would really like to see some more options there to make that inactive state clearer. As to the software and general performance of the phone, this has been outstanding, as you'd expect with any Apple phone. You've got an A16 Bionic chip in here, which is a slight improvement over the A15. If you're doing everyday things, using popular apps, texting, talking, that kind of thing, you're not going to notice a huge difference performance-wise anywhere outside maybe the camera system. I know a lot of people are complaining it's not a big enough upgrade over the 13 Pro, but I don't really see it in the same way. I try not to look too much at the incremental changes as a baseline for whether it's worth buying or not. I think most people aren't upgrading every year, and I know personally I came from an iPhone 12 to the 14, and I can definitely notice the improvements, but I kind of equate it to buying a car. If you buy a new car, you're going to get all the latest and greatest features, everything is brand new, so you don't have to worry about components crapping out on you. And when you buy that car, you're likely not going to buy the same car next year because it's not going to change a whole lot. I'd say you can expect a similar experience with an iPhone. If you bought a 13 Pro, there's likely not a whole lot that's changed performance-wise. It's still super powerful and can do everything that you want it to. Sure, there are some new bells and whistles, but even that camera system, while it does have some improvements, isn't a whole lot different. You still have a 3-camera array, but the biggest change has been the upgrade of the main camera to a 48 megapixel sensor, and slight improvements to all the other lenses on the camera system. If you go look online at comparisons between the 13 Pro and the 14 Pro, there honestly isn't a whole lot of difference. One area that is arguably better or most noticeable is when taking night photos. I've been really impressed with the quality of the night photos. Just for a test, I took some pictures while the power was out after the storm here, while it was pitch black. And the amount of light captured by the main sensor and the overall sharpness was fantastic, especially being handheld. Outside those low light improvements, all the lenses do a really good job of being color accurate and not overly saturated, which plagues a lot of phones, even flagships, so that's definitely nice to see. The dynamic range is outstanding, especially if you're shooting raw photos. Apple makes one of, if not the best camera systems out there, and whether you're a photographer or someone who is using the phone casually, there's a lot to offer there. When it comes to video, cinematic mode got bumped from 1080p to 4K this year as well, which in my opinion makes it a lot more usable, and it does a pretty good job overall. You could certainly use it for making YouTube videos, and beyond that, my favorite video feature is action mode. I don't know how much I'll use action mode in the real world, but it's one of the first things that I wanted to try out, just to see if it was going to be some weird gimmicky thing that only half worked, or if it would be actually useful, and I was blown away at how well it worked. I ran down the street, and while I was filming, it looked like the camera was going all over, shaking violently, but after playing it back, it was as smooth as butter. It's pretty wild that we can get this good of stabilization with software these days. The one disadvantage I've seen a bit of with the camera system is some flaring because of the materials used on the phone. The scratch preventative glass on the lenses combined with their design does seem to make them more prone to flares at times, but is still better than a lot of phones that I've tried. I don't know that this is something that's high on the list of manufacturers as something that they need to resolve. It seems like a lot of models are willing to sacrifice things like flaring for flashier designs and scratch-proof glass, It's not something that you really notice a lot, but every once in a while it does come into play. Outside that, this camera array as a whole does live up to its Pro designation, and I've been really happy with it. What I don't think lives up to the Pro label as much is the battery life. The iPhone 14 Pro doesn't eat battery by any means. I think the drain on it is acceptable for the most part, but just having went through a couple of days with no power, it became pretty evident that there are a lot of other devices with better overall battery life. iOS has always done a really great job of optimizing battery life, but with a ProMotion display and the small-ish battery on the Pro, it does drain a little quick for my liking. I do think that alone would probably make me consider the Pro Max if I had to buy this phone again, because it does last a little bit longer. And one other thing I think is worth mentioning, I did find it a little weird that buying a Pro iPhone, Apple still gives me this cheap looking rubber lightning cable, but if I go buy a $100 Magic Keyboard, they give you this super nice braided cable. It just seems like a weird choice. There's no power brick included with the iPhone, which there hasn't been for years now, so that shouldn't be a shock to anyone. I do prefer charging through MagSafe when available, and I will link my preferred charger and accessories in the description below for anyone who wants to check those out. I think charging and battery life is one area for me where I'd like to see some improvements. I just find myself charging this a lot more than other phones I've used recently, and for me, if you're going to have a bit shorter battery life, I'd like to see some kind of super fast charging enabled where you can top up your phone in a couple of minutes. And while this does have fast charging, it lags behind what other companies are doing in that area. This would probably be an easy win for Apple, where folks would actually notice the change versus trying to improve performance on the phone, which honestly 99% of people aren't going to notice. Overall, I am really happy with the phone. As I mentioned, I came from the iPhone 12, so this is a pretty big upgrade for me. I wanted this phone specifically for the camera system, and it hasn't disappointed there. But there are some areas that could be improved in my opinion, like the dynamic island functionality and the always on display, but the display itself, the design, performance, and camera system are all wins for me. It probably doesn't make sense to upgrade from a 13 Pro in most instances, but if you are coming from an older phone, you'll definitely notice a difference. If you're at a place where you're unsure about which iPhone to get, I made a buying guide video a few weeks ago, so be sure to check that out if you do want some help. I will link it below the video. I'd love to know what everyone else thinks of the iPhone this year. Do you have one? Are you buying one? Let me know how you feel about it in the comments down below, along with any questions that you might have. As always, if you enjoyed this video, rub up on that like button. If you want to see more tech-related content, or if you want to design a poorly made web series with me about how much coffee is too much coffee, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next upload.